Well, hey there. I hope everybody had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. About 6 days ago, I had my annual layout open house. So people from all around were able to come down here and check out the layout in person. We had a ton of fun. This year, we had about 175 people come through, which was a nice manageable figure. We've had some years where it topped 300 visitors. And if you've ever been down here in the layout room, you know that there's not a whole lot of space to hang out. And so with 300 plus people coming through, it can get really crazy really quickly. So yeah, a nice crowd this year, people coming and going all day. Some people stayed for hours and some people stayed for maybe 15, 20 minutes, but we had a ton of fun, and I am so humbled that so many people took the time to come down here and check out the layout in person. So if you visited, thank you so much. And if you missed the open house, don't worry, there's always next year. Anyway, what I want to do in this video is talk about the trains that I ran during the open house, the locomotives and the rolling stock. I was able to run quite a bit of stuff, some older tried and true stuff and some brand new stuff. So it was a whole lot of fun. Now, as is the case with any open house, nothing ever goes off without a hitch. There's always issues here and there. And that's just the way it goes. Anytime you have an open house, or more broadly, anytime you have visitors to your layout, locomotives that ran fine the day before, all of a sudden they don't want to cooperate. And that's just the way it goes. It doesn't mean it's a bad locomotive or a bad piece of rolling stock. It just means it was having a bad day. I kind of think of it like a baseball game. You know, you can have the best pitcher in the world on the mound, but every pitcher has a bad day. And so when that happens, the manager has to come out and take the ball, sit that pitcher, and bring in a fresh pitcher, or a fresh locomotive in this case, and keep on going. Because I don't want to sit there and troubleshoot a locomotive while there's people visiting the layout, because quite frankly, it's boring for people to watch that. So you just stash the locomotive away and say, okay, I'll look at it later tonight, and you bring out a fresh locomotive and keep going. So yeah, for any locomotives that I point out as having issues during the open house, don't read anything into it. That's just the way it goes when you have an open house. Anyway, with all that in mind, let's talk about what I ran during this year's open house. Oh, and by the way, my apologies in advance for the audio issues you're about to hear. I recorded all the audio on my main mic, but I accidentally lost those files. And so I had to use the backup scratch audio track, which is not nearly as consistent. So you're going to hear some volume differences and some EQ inconsistencies here and there. I tried to even it out as best as I could, but you're still going to notice. Anyway, let's get started. All right, so let's start off with the main train, the train that runs around the entire layout. It goes through every room. This year, I ran a tank train, so a whole bunch of tank cars, most of them made by Atlas. These are the Atlas 40-foot tank cars, and they are spectacular. In my opinion, these are the best tank cars in the entire hobby, hands down. Anybody who owns some of these will agree with me. They are amazing. And then I also mixed in some XMTH Atlas Premier tank cars and a few Lionel tank cars as well. And those were all being pulled by a couple of Lionel Legacy diesels. Now, I started off with the Space Force ES44. This is a custom run that was done by Legacy Station. And then in the lead was a Norfolk and Western Heritage ES44. The Space Force ES44 ran flawlessly all day for all 7 hours. The N&W ES44, it didn't take very long before it started misbehaving a bit. It kept on derailing on a certain switch in the Colorado room. I have no idea why, and I really didn't have time to troubleshoot it, so I just swapped it out for another diesel. Not this one. I initially swapped it out for the good old Lionel Vision Line GE hybrid demonstrator right there. You know, it's a workhorse. It worked flawlessly. However, I didn't want to run it the entire day because, you know, it is a little bit old and it's one of my favorites and it's very valuable. So I didn't want to overdo it. So I ran it for a couple hours and then I swapped it out for the Memphis Belle SD70, which is another custom run that was done by Legacy Station. And these two ran for the rest of the day and they ran perfectly. Up next on the inner loop of track on the main table here in the main room, I ran the Lionel Nickel Plate Road work train set along with the expansion pack, both of which I picked up at York this year from Brady's Trains. And it includes the Nickel Plate Road SW8, a couple of flat cars that have an operating ballast tamper and a speeder on board, some more work train related cars, including the cabin cars, one of which has sound, and then at the end, just for fun, I added the Eric's Trains caboose. This train ran perfectly the entire day, no issues whatsoever. However, for the last few hours of the open house, I, just to mix things up, swapped out the Nickel Plate Road SW8 for the Eric's Trains NW2. This also ran without any issues, so the trains on the inner loop of track had no issues whatsoever all day long. It was smooth running. Next, we come to the middle loop of track here on the main table in the main room, where it wasn't quite as smooth sailing as on the inner loop, at least not at first. So I started things off with the Lionel Vision Line Halloween Triplex, along with the brand new Lionel Halloween passenger cars. And, it was after Halloween, but I figured it's still fall colors, so it kind of fits in. And I just really wanted to try out these new passenger cars. They had come in just a couple days before the open house, and I was really excited about them. The passenger cars ran perfectly the entire time, as I would expect from XMTH passenger cars, which is what these are. Now, the Vision Line Triplex, on the other hand, I've run this thing on my layout plenty, and I've never had an issue with it. But for whatever reason, there was just bad mojo. This thing did not want to cooperate at all. It kept on derailing and cutting out for just no reason whatsoever. On track, it had ran smoothly on just the day before, so I don't know what was up, but it just wasn't cooperating. So like the manager in a baseball game, I asked for the ball, took the triplex off the layout, and replaced it with the relatively new Lionel Southern Pacific A1 Burke over here. This was a bit of a risk because it's fairly new. It doesn't have much runtime on the layout, but it ran great. I mean, it was a delight to run. Everybody loved it. So yeah, total home run with the new A1 Burke. Eventually, I swapped out the A1 Burke and the Halloween passenger cars. I replaced them with the Lionel Western Maryland 21-inch passenger cars and Lionel Western Maryland 1309. Both 1309 and the passenger cars ran perfectly, no issues whatsoever. Now, after a couple hours, I did swap out 1309 for the brand new Eric's Trains Appalachian Western 460 here. And just like 1309, it ran great, no issues whatsoever, which meant a lot, especially to me, since this is my own custom run. It would have sucked if it had had issues, but no, it ran great the entire time. Finally, late in the day, around 4 o'clock, when the open house was starting to wind down and it wasn't quite as crowded, I decided it would be okay to take a few risks. I usually do that every year when the open house is winding down. I say, well, it's not as crowded. I've got a little more room to maneuver and there's not as many people around to witness something not working right. And so, yeah, I took a risk and decided to try out the brand new Lionel Seaboard GM Demonstrator E6 AA set here. And man, it ran great. In fact, for about 10 minutes, I ran this thing at top speed, which is 200 on the Legacy remote, and it flew around the layout. It never missed a beat. It ran great the entire time. So yeah, great set here. And last but not least, we come to the upper loop of track here in the main room. That's the loop that goes over this cool custom steel bridge that a lot of you guys have seen over the years. Now, it's no longer on the track, but I started the day off by running my Lionel Union Pacific FEF3 Northern in the 49er paint scheme. And behind that, I had 8 Lionel 21-inch Union Pacific passenger cars. Those ran just fine for hours and hours, no problems whatsoever. But eventually I decided I wanted to switch things up. And so the first thing I did was I tried swapping out the FEF3 Northern with my Lionel 210-4 Santa Fe black bonnet that you see here. But when I put it on the tracks and it started moving, all of a sudden it started shaking and shuddering all over the place.
It starts shaking, really violently shaking, like it's having a nervous breakdown.
And I was really worried because, you know, it's always worked perfectly in the past, and what could be wrong with it? It kind of felt like it might be a mechanical issue, which is much preferred to an electronic issue. So I said, okay, well, I can't troubleshoot it now with all these people here. I'll set it aside and take a look at it later tonight. So the next one I tried was my Lionel UP Greyhound 412-2 that you see here. A beautiful locomotive. I've had it for a long time. Now, it ran, but it wasn't running well. It was having signal issues, and it kept on conking out and having sound cut in and out. It was basically having signal issues all over the place for no good reason. I mean, it's always run just fine, but there was just some weird mojo going on, and it didn't want to run smoothly. So I took that off. I then grabbed the Lionel Conrail T1 that you see here, and it ran fine for a couple hours. And then finally, toward the end of the day, I decided to take a risk, and I ran the brand new Lionel Nickel Plate Road 777 Burke here. It's just a few days old. I was a little nervous about running a brand new engine, especially a brand new steam engine, without ever having tested it on the layout. But I figured, you know, it's a Berkshire. They're usually pretty dependable. And man, did this thing come through. It ran like a Swiss watch. And man, this thing is so beautiful. Look at that. I mean, it was such a thrill to be able to run this thing at the open house and share it with people. So many people fell in love with it. I had several people say, man, I got to get myself one now. I mean, it is just a drop-dead gorgeous locomotive. Lionel hit it out of the park. And quite frankly, it's really one of the most beautiful locomotives in my collection now. So anyway, as I was running 777 here, I began to swap out the passenger cars. And so eventually they became a mixture of UP, Santa Fe, and Southern. Kind of a weird mixture, but I was sort of going for a rainbow effect, and it was just a whole lot of fun. And so the passenger cars and 777 ran fine for the rest of the open house. Now, later that night, I took a look at the 2 steam locomotives that were giving me trouble. So first up, the 412-2, you guessed it, later that night, it ran just fine. No issues whatsoever. I don't know what was going on during the open house, just weird mojo. Like I said, that happens sometimes, and it's just part of having an open house. So fortunately, nothing wrong with the 412-2. Now, the same can't be said or couldn't be said for the 210-4. When I powered it up, it started shaking and shuddering again, and so I decided to open it up and have a look. And fortunately, it was a mechanical issue and not an electronic issue. So the problem was that the motor was simply out of alignment. And so the little plastic universal gear thing that links the motor to the drive gear was not sitting in there properly and kept on popping out. And that's why it was shaking and shuddering. And so all I had to do was realign the motor and put it back together, and everything worked just fine. Now, I don't know how the motor got out of alignment because it's always been a smooth runner, but it did. But fortunately, it was an easy fix. You know, it took about 5 minutes, and it was good as new. And so I spent the rest of the night running the Santa Fe 210-4 black bonnet with the Santa Fe passenger cars, and that was how the day ended. right, so there you have it. That's everything that I ran during this year's open house. Again, I had so much fun, and thank you so much to everybody who came down. It is so incredibly humbling that people take time out of their busy schedules to come down here and visit the layout. I love it, and that's why I do it every year, because it is so much fun. And believe it or not, the most fun part is not running the trains, it's meeting everybody who comes down here to see the layout. Now, if I didn't run your favorite engine during the open house, don't worry. Again, there's always next year. Typically, what I do each year is after the open house, I will jot down which trains I ran during that open house. And that way the next year I can make sure I run some different stuff, or mostly different stuff. And that way, when people come visit the layout year after year, which a lot of people do, they get to see something different each year. So anyway, that's going to do it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm Eric Siegel. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. To discuss this model and any other O-Gauge trains, check out the O-Gauge Railroading online forum at ogrforum.ogaugerr.com.